Much like in the United States, here in Canada, we're all talking about whether or not it's a good idea to defund the police. And my position has always been, yes, it is, but a new poll from Ipsos shows that a majority of Canadians support the idea now as well. If you look at the poll, the question is, do you support defunding the police and reallocating those funds to other services like housing or mental health care? And you can see that it's very clearly 51-49. Now, of course, you might say that's really more of a divided opinion than a strong support for defund the police, and you'd be correct. But we have to understand that we weren't even having this discussion outside of exclusively left-wing circles weeks ago, certainly months ago. And now a majority of Canadians support defunding the police and taking part of that money and giving it to mental health care and other social services, which will reduce crime and replace part of the work police are doing right now while keeping marginalized communities safe from the police and from the struggles that lead them into contact with the police. And so I think that even if it's basically a tie right now, that's a huge victory for all those people that have been pushing for defund the police on both sides of the border. A lot of Americans like to assume that Canada just does everything better, that we don't have the same strife between different ethnic groups and different racial groups that they do in the United States. But that's not true. Our police have many of the same issues when it comes to how they interact with Black and Indigenous people in particular, and it often leads to situations like we've seen with George Floyd. There's been many cases in Canada of that happening since George Floyd and often before that. And so many people in a similar vein have been saying, look, by defunding the police, we can not only better use that money because the police in Canada as well often they gobble the municipal budgets of some of Canada's largest cities, but we can also in effect move that money to better ends and give the police less power to levy over Black and Indigenous people and their communities and families and what have you. And I think that that's a discussion that's growing. And one encouraging part of this data, one very encouraging part, is that younger people believe in defunding more than older folks, which shows that the future, as time moves on, there's likely to be growing support for defunding the police. Just throwing the data back up here, boomers only 40% support defunding, which means about 60% of boomers are against defunding the police, whereas Gen Xers are basically 50-50. They lean against defunding, but if you look at millennials and you look at Gen Z, there's massive support for defunding. Nearly 2/3 of millennials support defunding, and more than 3/4 of Gen Z support defunding. So when you add that all up, it's showing that the growing parts of the electorate, if they get out and vote, and if they hold these views going forward, will become an outright majority before very long. And it's showing that these younger people are starting to see that police, either in total or at least in part, do not provide value to communities, but actually subtract value from communities. And we have to start asking tough questions about how we reallocate the funds, the power, and the jurisdictional responsibilities away from police and to other professionals that are better suited to take care of folks. There's a couple prominent examples. When you talk about vice crimes, when you talk about things of that sort, things related to possession and what have you, basically, you should just legalize those things and decriminalize those things so the police can't levy that power over marginalized people. And another prominent example we've been asking for in Canada is for police, whenever possible, to not do mental health checkups. Because often what happens is the person that's being checked up ends up on the bad end of police aggression. And we don't want that anymore. And this isn't to say that there'll never be situations where there'll be a need for a more serious response, but it is to say that in the vast majority of cases, people with mental health struggles often end up being treated as perpetrators and not people in need of healthcare and emergency services. These are just a couple things we can do. And so on both sides of the border now, there are growing movements to defund the police. Growing movements that realize they're not providing services to all people, and in some cases they're making communities less safe. And a growing realization that if we are dealing with a situation where we have to allocate our resources more judiciously, we need to move them in a manner that serves the people. And that means less money for police and more money for education, healthcare, housing, mental health, all these sorts of things. The movement isn't stopping. The young people are behind it. In Canada and the United States, defund isn't going away. I know at the Toronto City Council, they lost a vote to defund the police. I know that. But the movement has just begun. There has been victories. Police have been removed from schools in Hamilton, Ontario. This is just starting. It ain't going away. Defund the police will win the day.